Good morning, podcast! Welcome back to another fun and exciting episode. I'm Irene. And I'm Mai.
And today we have a very special episode for you called Love, Lust, and Biology. Because have you ever had that feeling when your college crush walks into a room and suddenly your heart is thumping, your hands are shaking, you're sweating even, you get cold, butterflies, and suddenly you can't even speak and they haven't even said a word?
Why does love feel so physical? I mean, we've all experienced it, when someone walks into the room and suddenly your heart races. Are these feelings like all in our head, or is it generally just our body changing?
Exactly. Actually, even though love is emotional, it's also very biological and physical. Because it's also your brain, your nervous system, the butterflies, and also your hormones. So if you've ever wondered, why does this happen? This episode is for you. So what is the science of attraction? Like, what actually happens when you find someone attractive? Because it's not something that's just like instantaneous, right? It's several systems talking to each other. It's sensory perception, brain evaluation, your reward and motivation, physiological arousal, and conscious attraction. Though it does happen quickly. Did you see that one study, I think by Willis and Todorov, where participants formed impressions of unfamiliar faces after seeing them for only 100 milliseconds. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily love at first sight, you'll fall for them instantly, but your brain certainly already makes an impression of someone's face that quick. And no matter how much time passes after that, the instant perception that you have doesn't necessarily change. It's actually very interesting to think about. Because your brain has already processed things like facial structure, symmetry, expression, gaze, movement, and things like that.
Yeah, but attraction is not just an appearance, it has many layers. Like they work together.
Yeah.
Like you have sexual attraction, and you also have romantic and emotional attraction. So, like for example, the emotional attraction, right? Like you can't just find someone attractive just because they smell good or because they look nice, but also because of how they treat you also. Yeah, that's how we become attracted to them.
Yeah, and you can look at someone thinking they're handsome or cute or whatever and not necessarily instantly want to date them, right? So, because there's a distinction between those three levels of attraction. But why does a crush become so mentally consuming? The emotional side of it is actually your hormones. So the first one we'll be looking into is dopamine. So this dopamine isn't just necessarily a pleasure chemical, as we know. It's heavily involved in your reward system, motivation, reinforcement, attention, and also anticipating rewards. So research on romantic love has found that activity in dopamine-rich reward regions, such as your ventral tegmental area and caudate nucleus, actually gets activated when people look at photographs of someone they are intensely in love with. So imagine you look at someone you like, your brain finds the stimulus rewarding, attention increases, you seek more information, you see more content, and then reward reinforces. So it's a cycle that keeps on going. So what other hormones are actually involved other than dopamine?
There's actually another two hormones, which are testosterone and also estrogen, but there's a bit of misinformation where people think that testosterone makes you attracted to men and estrogen makes women fall in love, but that's far too simplistic. Yeah. So actually sex hormones influence sexual motivation and behavior, but they don't determine who you fall in love with. There's a study that said testosterone has been associated with sexual desire in both men and women. So to summarize, testosterone and estrogen influence sexual motivation and dopamine reward and pursuit. Psychology determines what qualities becomes attractive.
Okay, so the hormones are part of a overall machinery, so it doesn't contain like a little GPS that guides you to whoever your crush is.
Yes.
But then, what about pheromones? Have you heard about that, where people say that humans release pheromones that other people get sexually attracted to?
That's only involved in animals.
Because I've seen TikToks of people putting pheromones on and suddenly they're attracted to the person. But actually, I don't think there's actual scientific evidence for that. There's no convincing evidence for a single human pheromone that reliably produces sexual attraction. Humans absolutely do respond to smells and body odor, but there has also been extensive research into whether immune system genes, such as MHC, influence odor preferences and mate choice. But the evidence is not strong enough to say, oh, your body can smell exactly who you're into. That is not a thing. So a meta-analysis found no overall significant association between MHC similarity, dissimilarity, and human mate selection. So if you're getting all those TikTok shop notifications for pheromones, don't fall for it, okay? And obviously with celebrities, you're not even experiencing their natural odor. You're experiencing visual and auditory information through a screen. So pheromones is clearly not a very big thing.
I see.
So speaking of celebrities, but then why can you be attracted to someone you've never met?
Yeah, I wonder.
So who's your celebrity crush?
Oh my god, I recently been into the Jude Bellingham.
Oh yeah, because of the World Cup.
God, World Cup, yeah, correct.
So
what about you?
mine is Park Hae-soo. He's a
Ooh.
Korean actor. So okay, let's talk about Jude Bellingham first then. So you can build a mental representation from just his, photographs, his matches, whatever, performances, body language, personality cues. But this is particularly relevant for celebrities because you don't just see them, right? Obviously, you've never met them.
Yeah.
You see a curated collection of information on them. So that can create, you feel familiar with someone despite having no kind of relationship with them. So your brain is effectively thinking, oh, it's like you know this person when you logically know that you've never met them. So what is the science behind this? You can just read it off. You can say the movement thing. So what is the science behind you liking Jude Bellingham then? Because it's not just his face, right?
Yeah, it's not just his face. It's all about his movement also. You know the celebration that he did in the World Cup. Yes, that one I felt like wow, it was really cool for me. And like he's also one of the top scorer for World Cup, which was really cool.
Yeah, and movement gives the brain additional social information to curate, right?
That's true.
And then, so it's not just Jude's face, it can also be his voice, his movement, his confidence, his competence, and also his social behavior. And that combination is what makes your brain seek out the reward. So competence can also be something that is attractive, and also status and social signaling. Because something like high status and apparent normality, this is something that allows your brain to develop that sense of familiarity. Because Jude is someone who's known to repeatedly speak about his family, I believe. So that is what allows your brain to spark that recognition and then begin the reward system. So, okay, let's skip that. Oh, okay. So the question here is, are you actually attracted to Jude, or are you attracted to what Jude represents, right? Because we don't actually know these people. And I think that is a very, it's a very interesting question to ask yourself regarding your celebrity crushes. For example, mine, Park Hae-soo, right? Completely different from Jude Bellingham. He's an actor, he's quiet, more reserved, very family-oriented also, but he really keeps to himself. And I think that is also something that is very interesting psychologically, because low outward expressiveness, but high perceived depth. So imagine, right, you have person A and person B. So you have someone who's more expressive and someone who's less expressive. When someone is less expressive, you inherently have to observe them more, which means you notice all the tiny facial expressions, pauses, tone of voice, what they choose to say and what they don't choose to say. And I suppose that's why people like me are more interested in that nonchalant attitude. So because someone like that may create more curiosity, and curiosity itself can sustain attention, and when you sustain attention, again, recognition and reward system. So
yeah, I think personality also plays a role in here. Like for me, I'm an introverted person, so that the opposite attracts. So I'm attracted to person who are extroverted, person who express themselves more.
And I'm an extroverted person, and I'm much more into people who are introverted. Oh, you. Okay, I don't know if I should say this on podcast. But have you seen Agent Kim reactivated?
Oh my god, yeah, I've seen it.
Agent Kim
know the main guy? He's so my type.
Oh.
Did you get it? 'Cause he's like so quiet and
Yes.
he's just like
Yeah.
very family oriented. Yeah.
I
If
get
you
it.
haven't seen Agent Kim, watch Agent Kim. The main guy, that's my type, and then you'll understand.
So why are we so different though? Like what actually determines this type? But it's not necessarily just physical appearance, right? It's a cluster of traits. Why do we have these like different types? Okay, like is it evolutionary or is it social influence? But I think the right answer is that it's both, right? Because evolutionary psychology can explain why certain broad characteristics may influence mate preferences, but culture, media, personal experience determine how those expressions are even, how those preferences are even expressed. So, okay, now we're ending it. So, since we have such different types then, like what actually attracted you to Jubel?
That's a really difficult question for me to answer. Like, it's not just his appearance; it's everything about him. How he's behaving. It's actually a mix of everything. Like you said, the physical, emotional, all the attractions.
Since we have such different types, do you think that also means we have different emotional attachment styles?
Yeah. Yes, I believe so.
Let's talk about that.
Alright, do you guys know that we have different attachment styles? Alright, so before I get into the different attachment styles, I'm going to explain what is attachment. So attachment is the psychological system that regulates our desire for closeness, our safety and support from important people. So there are two attachment styles, attachment anxiety and also attachment avoidance. So what is attachment anxiety? Attachment anxiety is usually when people with this attachment anxiety tend to be more sensitive to rejection, abandonment, and signs that their partner is pulling away. But for attachment avoidance, it means that people with this attachment tend to be less comfortable with emotional dependence and intimacy. So, Irene, what's your attachment styles?
I think mine is more anxious attachment.
Oh, that's the same.
See, that's really interesting because even though we have two completely different types, our styles, our attachment styles in them are the same. It actually originally comes from developmental psychology anyway, because infants depend on caregivers for protection, right? So as we grow up, those attachment processes don't simply just disappear. But actually, speaking of attachment, what does a secure attachment actually look like? Because secure attachment isn't, oh, I never get jealous, anxious, or upset. It's more like I can experience those emotions without believing that the relationship is instantly in danger. It's allowing you to still feel emotions without jumping into conclusions. So a securely attached person can genuinely depend on someone without feeling weak, allow their partner to depend on them, communicate their needs, tolerate some form of distance, handle conflict without immediately assuming abandonment, be vulnerable without feeling completely unsafe. So research has linked greater attachment security with better romantic relationship functionings, including observed emotional tone and conflict resolution. So attachment style doesn't necessarily determine your destiny. Someone can have anxious tendencies and still have an incredibly healthy relationship. Someone can appear very secure in one relationship and become anxious in another. Your attachment style is relationship sensitive and also context sensitive. But I'll say the last line. Your attachment system is relationship sensitive and extremely context sensitive.
But why do some people fear commitment?
Oh yeah, I know a lot of people who fear commitment. I'll say that last part. So actually, yeah, I know a lot of people who definitely fear commitment.
Oh.
Yeah. Because like when a relationship becomes serious, intimacy itself can become a threat cue, right? So an avoidant person may therefore experience closeness, vulnerability, perceived loss of independence, discomfort, and therefore emotional distancing. Whereas someone with anxious attachment may experience closeness, fear of losing a relationship, hypervigilance, reassurance seeking, temporarily renewed anxiety.
So that's totally me, the anxiety one.
So it's a cycle, right? It's a cycle where really, what if the thing you interpret as your partner being difficult is actually their nervous system just trying to protect them? So these two different attachment styles mean completely different things, but it's all about you and your partner to actually navigate that. So since you can kind of go in between the two and it can still be a cycle, can attachment styles change?
Yes, they do change.
So again, like I said, like it's context sensitive and relationship sensitive, right? So you could be avoidant sometimes and anxious in another, right? Because attachment was historically treated as relatively stable, but modern research suggests it can actually change over time. A 2025 longitudinal study follows 1,036 couples found that attachment insecurity can change during relationships, although the changes were generally modest and not all dimensions change in the same way. There's also evidence that attachment security can co-develop with couples. In a longitudinal study of 172 couples followed over a year, changes in one partner's relationship-specific attachment security were conducted with changes in the other partner. So this gives you a beautiful concept of your relationship can teach your brain what relationships are supposed to feel like, obviously if it's healthy. And this brings us, I suppose, into trust, right?
Yes. And you know that trust isn't just a feeling, it's predictive. So let's say that if your partner says, I'll call you tonight, and they consistently call you, your brain will learn that your brain will adapt to your partner's words to reliable prediction. So if they repeatedly say something and don't follow through, so your brain will adapt to the opposite, which you become unreliable. So over time, trust becomes partly about predictability.
I spoke about the first segment about how you expect, right? How you expect reward or you expect a certain outcome, and how that can kind of not trick your brain but train your brain in a way. So when it comes to trust, or how your brain works with trust, what is mainly in play there biologically? Oh. Okay. So when it comes to trust and predictability, what is mainly in play there? I mean, biologically, we're talking about science.
Biologically, there's a hormone involved. It's called oxytocin. So as we all know, oxytocin is known as love hormone, but that's just too simple. Biologically, oxytocin is a neuropeptide involved in social behavior, bonding, and attachment. Research has implicated that oxytocin in romantic attachment and social affiliation, but human findings are much more complicated than the popular cuddle hormone narrative.
Yeah. For example, a study of new romantic couples found differences in oxytocin between new lovers and unattached individuals. And oxytocin levels were related to interactive reciprocity within couples. So, a large systematic review or meta-analysis found that human oxytocin findings are heterogeneous, with methodological differences and inconsistent causal effects.
Yeah, so oxytocin is one biological system involved in social bonding, but it does not single-handedly create love and trust.
Which is why we say that just simply saying oxytocin equals to love is is really too simple. But then what about on the other end? So we have trust and love, and then on the other end we have stress, right? Sometimes stressful relationships can be physically exhausting and physically draining, right?
Yeah.
So when you're stressed, the body activates systems, including the sympathetic nervous system and the HPA axis. The HPA axis ultimately increases your cortisol levels. Normally, that would be useful. You're preparing your body to deal with a challenge. But relationships can become such a repeated source of stress, especially if it's unhealthy. So for example, you have conflict, threat perception, physiological arousal, cortisol, heightened emotional state. And now you're trying to have a rational conversation while your body is ultimately producing such a high level of cortisol repeatedly, right? So you keep thinking, we are under attack. So your cognitive brain may understand the situation while your physiological stress response is still activated regardless. So your partner's stress can affect your physiology too. Because research has found evidence of physiological interdependence between romantic partners. One study of married couples found that on days when couples experienced conflict, having a more stressed partner was associated with altered cortisol patterns. So your cortisol levels are basically interdependent. So having your cortisol levels heightened so consistently is not good for your body and not good cognitively and psychologically too. So that brings us to healthy relationships, right?
Yeah, so what actually keeps the long-term relationship healthy?
I guess the first one is commitment. Yeah. What else?
I think appreciation also.
Yeah.
Appreciation.
People don't just want to feel loved, they want to feel noticed,
Yeah,
right?
that's really important when you're in a relationship. You need both support from each other, so
Yeah.
appreciation is really important.
Responsiveness,
Mm.
and as I mentioned with the cortisol levels, right? So you
Yes.
need to learn to manage conflicts and how do you manage that spike in cortisol.
Yes, and of course, relationship is not gonna be like long-lasting if there's no conflict, right? So you also need to know how to manage conflict with each other.
Yeah.
Intimacy and satisfaction. And then, so I suppose when we already have this list, let's look into a couple, right? Well, what's trending nowadays? Let's think about Euphoria, right? So in Euphoria, the one that I can think about is Nate and Maddie. I guess that's the most popular couple. So do we think that they would be scientifically approved? Attachment, I suppose they seek a lot of closeness. I've heard that they are very, very interdependent. They don't tolerate each other's independence because they are very dependent on each other. I do not think they calm each other down. They communicate their needs in a very loud and expressive manner. They don't have much trust or commitment if you watch the show. So I personally would say that science is concerned. I don't think science would want Nate and Maddie to be together. But I don't think science would want Nate and Cassie to be together either. So perhaps Euphoria is not the best place to look for a healthy relationship. And I guess that brings us to how do you deal with heartbreak and what is heartbreak?
Okay, so just now you mentioned about heartbreak. Why does a breakup actually hurt?
Yeah. Why does a heartbreak actually hurt, right? Because heartbreak really isn't just emotional, right? It can also turn into something very biological and physical. Because I've seen people have chest tightness, nausea, loss of appetite, headaches.
Yes, loss of appetite is much more common.
Yeah.
I've seen people just,
Insomnia also.
yeah, people just, isolate themselves in a room for days, even for weeks.
Yeah. Because when you experience rejection or separation, your brain's social threat and distress systems become activated, right? I've seen early neuroimaging research found overlap between neural systems involved in social rejection and physical pain. So particularly regions in the ACC and also your insula. So social rejection is not literally identical to physical pain, but more recent work show that physical pain and social rejection have distinct neural representations. So heartbreak engages some of the brain system involved in physical pain and distress, which may help explain why emotional pain can feel so physical. So the main one that is usually seen is chest pain, right?
Why is that?
Because it's you know how people say oh, you can actually feel it in your heart. So is it actually the heart? So when your sympathetic nervous system becomes activated, emotional threat, sympathetic activation, increased heart rate, muscle tension, altered breathing. So at the same time, your HPA axis, hypothalamus, CRH, pituitary, ACTH, adrenal cortex, and cortisol. So cortisol helps mobilize energy during stress. So that's useful when you're escaping a physical threat. But your brain doesn't necessarily care whether the threat is a predator or because you've gone through a breakup. So your body can still respond with physiological arousal. That's why heartbreak can generally feel like your entire body is so on edge. It's because your brain may not be able to make that distinction.
Can you talk more into stress hormones after the breakup?
So cortisol is the main one, right? So it's part of the body's stress regulation system. And relationship experiences can influence cortisol regulation. So research on couples has, as I mentioned earlier, explained physiological interdependence. So including associations between partners' cortisol patterns. So after a breakup, you're not necessarily walking around with permanently elevated cortisol, but it's more accurate to say that a loss of an important attachment relationship can produce a significant stress response, and repeated rumination and emotional triggers can reactivate that response. But I think the interesting part is how your brain is still expecting, right? It's still part of that routine. So why doesn't your brain immediately understand that the relationship is over?
I think it's because when you're in a relationship, your brain builds a huge network of associations. Like your brain, when you guys are in a routine together, you guys are developing a routine together. So after you lose someone, so everything is still embedded in your brain.
It's like predictive.
Yes. I think it's because when you're in a relationship, your brain builds a huge network of associations. Like your brain, when you guys are in a routine together, you guys are developing a routine together. So after you lose someone, so that routine is still embedded in your brain.
It's like predictive.
Yes.
Which is why the whole predictive and reward response was so important from previous segments. Because once it's gone, it means that your body is still expecting it. It is still looking for that routine, even though you in your head or in your heart, you know that it's over, right? But neural associations don't just disappear overnight like the person may.
Yes. And I forgot to mention that this heartbreak does not revolve around relationships, but
Yeah.
also it can go over losing someone you love.
Even grief.
Even grief, right?
Yes.
Because when you're grieving someone, it's also another predicting thing. Like you predict that you'll see them in their room, but then you don't. So then that is something that your body takes time to actually adjust to. So which is why some people get obsessive, or some people always, I don't know, check social media, or they have
Some people also replay their old conversations.
they can have delusions also. It's a whole range of things that can be, there's a very thin line between healthy and unhealthy, right? And then, skip that. So in that case, then how does the brain actually recover? Because we mentioned that it takes time, right?
Yeah.
You don't just suddenly stop loving them. But then how do we recover from that? Basically, you just have to talk about your brain gradually updates the predictions. So we have new predictions. So how do we actually recover then? If our brain takes so long, how do we even heal?
Okay, so we said that our brain cannot change overnight, so it takes time for our brain to update its predictions.
Ah, right. So like let's say I used to go to a coffee shop with my ex, and then I would always remember him every time I went. But then slowly I would go to the coffee shop without him after we've broken up. So your brain starts updating that prediction that going to the coffee shop does not necessarily mean him. So slowly that level of cortisol doesn't spike when you don't see him, because you no longer predict it, you no longer expect it. So over time, you move on.
Okay, so let's hear from someone who just recently got to their heartbreak.
In the heartbreak hotline. So we had someone submit. We broke up 3 months ago. I'm completely over them during the day, but every night I check their Instagram. Why can't I stop? That sounds a bit stalkerish, but we listen. Okay, we listen and we don't judge. So let's break it down, right? So let's look into the first part that we've been speaking about this whole time is the brain. So reward and attachment systems are still responding to cues associated with the person. So maybe you're still looking for that dopamine spike or oxytocin spike because, from seeing their face. And perhaps the only way you can see their face is through social media, from their posts, their updates, whatever it is, since you're not getting it personally anymore. What else?
Behavior. Checking their social media can give you information and temporarily reduces uncertainty and also reinforcing the behavior.
Your body too, I guess that kind of ties into the brain, and psychologically, rumination keeps the relationship cognitively active, because remember your brain hasn't necessarily processed it yet.
Psychology as well. Rumination keeps the...
I just said that.
Seriously.
But let's talk about recovery, okay? Girls, stop this, okay? okay, or whoever you are, stop this, okay? Reducing repeated cues, developing new routines, and allowing yourself to process loss can help your brain adapt. So are you really missing the person, or are you just missing the version of yourself and the life you had when they were there? Mic drop. That is such a hard-hitting question. Why would you ask that? Sorry. But yeah, okay. Basically, please help your brain understand that the relationship is over. And I think that's the way, and I think there's a lot of myths that revolve around that, right? The myth of no contact or whatever it is, and I think that's something we'll talk about next. So speaking about love myths, one of the ones I can think about is, I suppose, love at first sight.
Yes, love at first sight. I mean, we've all heard of this before, right? Love at first sight. So the myth is you can meet someone and immediately fall in love. So that's love at first sight. So what does science actually say about this? So instant attraction is real, but instant love is much harder to define. So the brain can make extremely rapid judgments about another person's face. So there's a classic experiment where participants form impressions of unfamiliar faces after exposure of only 100 milliseconds. So these rapid judgments were surprisingly similar to judgments made after longer viewing times.
Attraction isn't the same thing as love, right? So we can define, I suppose we can sort of define attraction by how the brain instantly recognizes or forms judgment. But as you said, we can't really define love. So love at first sight, hard to define, probably a myth.
Yes. So the question is, when we fall for someone at first sight, are we actually falling for them or for the version of them our brain creates from a few seconds of image? That's for you guys to think about.
Yeah. And the next one, I guess, is soulmates, right? I'm not going to talk about it like psychologically or religiously, but just scientifically, is there really one person in the world who's biologically destined to be a partner? And the answer is, there is no evidence for a predetermined soulmate. There is no known biological mechanism that searches the population and identifies it's you, okay? But the feeling of finding the one is in fact very real. And there's an interesting psychological reason, because as a relationship develops, your brain accumulates an enormous amount of information about that person. You know, their face, voice, smell, touch, memories, routines, conversations, shared history, experience. Eventually, that person has become deeply integrated to your brain's expectations and attachment system that they become irreplaceable. But that doesn't mean they were predestined to be your soulmate. It means you built a unique relationship with them. And the one that we mentioned earlier was no contact, right?
Yeah.
So
what's the myth?
The myth is that if you stop contacting your ex, you'll eventually stop loving them.
So what's the scientific answer for that?
I suppose that no contact can help because you're stopping that predictability, right? Of always looking forward to the text, always looking forward to their messages. But it's not necessarily something that is a biological reset button. It's not like, oh, we'll go 30 days with no contact and I'll 100% forget about you. It's not something that is predetermined. It is a mechanism that can help, but it's not something that can really be scientifically proven. So I would say that it's kind of 50-50 on that one, on no contact. Cool. So I guess bringing us back to the heartbreak hotline, checking their social media can keep you stuck, right? Because it's an intermittent reinforcement, and this is a psychological term for all your psychology majors. So maybe you check their profile constantly, and there'll be nothing, and then suddenly they post something, like 3 weeks later, and then suddenly it spikes you again. And that's intermittent reinforcement. And actually, this is more strong than you having predictability. So it is much more suitable for you to just never check. Because once you fall into this intermittent reinforcement, it's much tougher to break. And that is psychologically proven. So maybe science actually doesn't make love less romantic. It just tells us that the feelings we're experiencing have mechanisms behind them. But if biology influences attraction, attachment, heartbreak, how much of love is actually biology and how much is it our choice? And that is something that you can think about.
So on this special edition of the Biomed class, we've spoken intensely about love, lust, and biology, and how love, lust, and biology are all actually interconnected, right? And how the brain and your nervous system can develop this kind of routine that can keep you stuck even well after heartbreak or loss. So we've also briefly spoken about attachment styles and and a good, proper, secure attachment style. We've also spoken about our own experiences with Jude and Parkesu, and we've also spoken about someone else's experience in terms of heartbreak. And the questions that we're leaving you with are, what actually surprised you the most? How much of love is biology and how much is it your choice, in your opinion? And can understanding science actually improve our relationship? If love is really driven by biology, why does every relationship feel unique?
Yeah. Let us know what you guys think.
And that's it from us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.